Hello and welcome back to Unanswered. I'm Alex. I'm here to guide you through the files, the facts, and the official records.
And I'm Maya. I'm here to look at the people behind those files and sort of the human cost of these events.
Today we are opening the dossier right back up to the page where we left off. If you were with us for our last deep dive, you already know the scene.
Yeah.
It's late February 1959. Yeah. We're on the slope of Kholod Sakhl, and the rescue team has just arrived.
It is such a haunting image. I mean, you've got this vast, white, just completely unforgiving landscape.
Right.
And there, half buried in the snow, is the tent. It's been slashed open from the inside. We know they cut their way out, but the tent is empty. Their boots, their coats, everything they needed, it was all just left behind.
And that's the real-life cliffhanger the search team was facing. I mean, that tent was the only shelter for miles around. To abandon it, especially without proper footwear, was, well, it was basically a death sentence.
But they did it.
They did. So today, we're going to follow their path. We're moving from the search to the discovery of the bodies. We'll look at the medical reports and try to make sense of the official conclusion that, frankly, didn't conclude much of anything.
Feels like we're right there with the searchers. You look in that tent, you see the supplies left behind, the boots all lined up, and you just realize something terrified these 9 experienced hikers so badly that they chose.
They chose the freezing cold over the safety of that shelter, precisely. And the investigation, it didn't stay at the tent for long. The focus shifted almost immediately.
Okay.
They found footprints, 8 or 9 sets of them leading away from the campsite.
And we really need to talk about those footprints because they tell a story, don't they?
They do. The tracks were described as clear at first. They showed the group was moving downhill, down the slope toward a tree line about 1.5 kilometers away.
Okay.
But what's crucial here, and it's noted right in the case files, is the pace. They weren't sprinting.
Yeah.
The stride length suggests they were walking.
See, that's the part that is so hard to reconcile. If you're panicked enough to cut your way out of a tent, why aren't you running?
You'd expect chaos.
Total chaos. But instead, they walk down into the dark, summon just socks into that wind.
The tracks did eventually disappear as the snow got deeper, but the trajectory was clear. The searchers followed this line down toward the edge of a forest, and this is where the search, well, it turns into a recovery operation.
The atmosphere for that rescue team must have been just suffocating, moving away from the tent, deeper into this valley, knowing every step is taking you further from where they should have been.
Right. And then, at the edge of the forest, near this large old cedar tree, they found the first tangible evidence of what happened that night.
The fire.
They found the remains of a small fire, and next to it, the first 2 bodies, Yuri Kvonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko.
And finding them must have been a shock, but it was their condition that was really, really disturbing.
Yeah, the official inquest notes are very specific here. Both men were found stripped down to their underwear.
And that cold.
In negative 30 degrees Celsius, maybe even colder with the wind, they had almost no clothing on.
It's just horrifying to picture. You hear about paradoxical undressing, right? Where late-stage hypothermia makes your brain think it's on fire, so you strip off your clothes. Is that what we're looking at here?
That's the common theory, yes.
Yeah.
But the context here at the cedar tree, it suggests something a bit more complex. The branches on that tree had been broken up to a height of about 5 meters.
5 meters, that's what, over 15 feet up?
Yes. And they found forensic traces of skin in the bark. It indicates that someone was frantically climbing that tree.
Why? To get branches for the fire.
That's one idea. Or maybe to get a vantage point to look back up the slope toward the tent.
Or to see if whatever scared them was still there.
But the clothing thing, it wasn't just that they were undressed, right? There's more to it.
No, it's more complicated. The investigation found that their clothes weren't just discarded. Later, when other bodies were found, those bodies were wearing items that belonged to Krivonischenko and Doroshenko.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and cuts in the fabric suggested the clothes had actually been removed from the bodies at the cedar tree after they had died.
That is a detail that just, it breaks your heart. It means the survivors had to make that impossible choice. To scavenge clothing from their dead friends to buy a few more hours of life. It's just pure desperation.
It is. It establishes a timeline of tragedy.
Yeah.
These 2 at the cedar tree, they likely died first, but they were only 2 of the 9.
Right.
So the searchers continued. In the days following, they began to find the others. But they weren't in the forest.
They were back on the slope.
Correct. Between the cedar tree and the tent, they found 3 more bodies. Igor Dyatlov, the leader, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobin.
And their positions. That positions tell a story all on their own.
They do. They were found at intervals 300 meters, 480, 630 meters from the cedar. They were spaced out, forming a line, and crucially, their heads were all pointing uphill.
They were trying to go back.
That was the conclusion of the investigators, that after the fire at the cedar tree failed, or maybe they realized they couldn't survive without their gear, they tried to crawl back up that slope.
The sheer will that must have taken to leave the trees, turn back into that wind, exhausted, freezing, and just try to climb again. It's so tragic. They died one by one, alone, unable to reach the very tent they had just fled from.
And up to this point in the investigation, the narrative was, well, grim, but scientifically consistent. The medical examiner did the autopsies on these first 5 bodies. He found minor scrapes and bruises. Slobodin had a small cranial fracture, but nothing that would have been lethal. The cause of death for all 5 was ruled as hypothermia. They froze to death.
Okay. If that had been the end of it, we probably wouldn't even be talking about this today. It would just be a terrible hiking accident.
Exactly. A tragic mistake in bad weather. But there were still 4 hikers missing.
And they stayed missing for months.
Right. The search went on through March through April. It wasn't until May, when the snow really began to melt, that the final chapter of the discovery was written. And this is where the case moves from a tragedy to a mystery that has just remained unanswered.
The condition of these last 4 bodies was completely different.
The searchers found them deeper in the woods, about 75 meters from the cedar tree, down in a ravine. They were buried under 4 meters of snow. It was a makeshift den of sorts.
Okay.
This was where they found Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolovatov, and Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignoles.
And unlike the others, they didn't just freeze to death.
No. When the autopsies were performed on this ravine group, the findings were shocking. 3 of the 4 had sustained lethal injuries. Thibeaux-Brignoles had a major skull fracture. But it was Dubinina and Zolotaryov that just baffled the medical examiners.
They both had massive chest fractures.
Massive. The medical files use very specific comparisons. Dr. Vozrozhny stated that the force required to cause that kind of damage would be equal to the impact of a car crash.
A car crash.
Or a significant shock wave. Dubinina had broken ribs on both sides of her chest. Zolotaryov, similar crushing injuries. Their chests were caved in.
And this is the paradox, isn't it? Because usually if you get hit by a car or you fall from a great height, your body shows it on the outside. Bruises, cuts.
Exactly. And that is the detail that just defies explanation. Despite the bones being crushed internally, there was almost no external soft tissue trauma.
Wait, what?
No major cuts, no massive bruising on the skin that corresponded to the fractures. The report almost describes it as if they were subjected to some high pressure that squeezed them without tearing the skin.
That is deeply unsettling. I mean, how is that even possible? How do you crush a rib cage without leaving a mark?
It's extremely rare. It ruled out a simple fall or a fight or an animal attack. An animal would leave bite marks, claws. A fall would cause scrapes. This is a clean, compressive force.
And they were alive when it happened.
The autopsy noted hemorrhaging in the heart. So yes, they were alive when this force struck them.
It just changes the entire story. It goes from man against nature to something so much more violent and inexplicable. And then there are the other details, the ones people always whisper about.
You're referring to the soft tissue findings.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's hard to talk about, but it's right there in the official report. Dubinina was missing her tongue.
It is in the report.
Ew.
But we have to look at this with a clinical eye. The bodies in that ravine had been exposed to the elements for 3 months.
Right?
They were lying in a wet environment with water from the melting snow flowing through.
So it's decomposition and scavengers.
That's the most scientifically sound explanation.
Yeah.
Small animals and the action of water can remove soft tissue very quickly.
Right.
The medical examiner didn't note any instrument marks, nothing to suggest it was cut out. It was just listed as missing.
But when you combine it with the crazy internal injuries, it just adds to this macabre feeling that something unnatural happened there.
It really does.
It feels like every time you try to find a logical foothold, the ground just gives way. You have the tent, the bodies, the crushed chests.
Yeah.
And then there's the radiation.
This is a detail that often gets blown out of proportion, but it's a verified part of the case file. Investigators did bring a Geiger counter to the scene.
Which is a question in itself. Why bring a radiation detector to a search for missing hikers?
It's a valid question. This was the Cold War era. The Urals were a hub for military and industrial activity. It's possible the authorities suspected the hikers had stumbled into some kind of testing zone.
And they found
They
something,
found trace amounts of beta radiation on the clothing of a few of the hikers.
but not all of them.
No, it was patchy. Found on dirt that was ingrained in the fabric. It wasn't a lethal dose it washed off. But it was there. It was documented. Radioactive contamination.
It just adds this whole other layer of paranoia. I mean, was it from the environment? Was it something they touched? Or was it, like some people say, contamination from their jobs?
We don't know. The source of the radiation was never determined in the official investigation. It just sits there in the file. Another unanswered variable, an anomaly that doesn't fit the picture of a simple hiking accident.
So let's take stock of where we are. It's May 1959. All the bodies are recovered, the families are grieving, they want answers. The investigators have this pile of contradictory evidence. So what did they do? How do you close a case like this?
The conclusion of the official investigation is maybe the most famous part of this whole legacy. The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, he was under a lot of pressure to wrap things up. He couldn't explain the injuries. He couldn't explain the panic.
Right.
So the final report listed the cause of death as exposure, precipitated by, and this is a direct quote, a powerful force which the hikers were unable to overcome.
A powerful force. It sounds so vague. It sounds like something out of a myth, not a legal document.
The original Russian implies an elemental force, something irresistible,
Yeah.
like a hurricane. But it's a non-answer. It admits they faced something lethal, but it refuses to define what it was.
So it's basically the investigators saying, look, we know something killed them, but we have no idea what it is, so we're just going to call it a force.
Essentially, yes, it closes the file without solving what happened. And that is exactly what they did. The case was formally closed. The files were sent to a secret archive.
And that secrecy, I mean, that's part of the problem, isn't it?
It is the root of this entire mystery. The area was declared off-limits to hikers for 3 years. The files were classified. Families were told not to ask any more questions.
When you lock the doors on the truth like that, people are going to imagine what's behind them. If they had just said it was a storm and released the data, maybe we wouldn't be here. But classifying it, that implies there was something to hide.
And that suspicion was seemingly confirmed years later. In the 1990s, after the Soviet Union fell, Lev Ivanov, that lead investigator, he gave an interview. He admitted he suspected military involvement. He talked about seeing glowing orbs in the sky that night.
Oh.
But he was ordered by high-ranking officials to remove that from the file and just close the case.
So the official conclusion was a lie, or at least a deliberate omission.
It was a compromise. A powerful force satisfied the paperwork, but it left the truth buried in the snow.
You know, standing here at the end of this part of the story, looking at all of it, the tent, the frozen bodies, the crushed ribs, the radiation, it really feels like the title of our show is the only accurate description. It is simply unanswered.
The 1959 investigation gave us a timeline of death, but it completely failed to provide a cause. It told us how they died, hypothermia and trauma, but it never, ever answered why. Why leave the tent? What was the force that crushed them?
It's a story that feels like it shouldn't be real. The facts are so much stranger than anything you could make up. But these were real people. 9 bright, strong people who walked into the mountains and just met something they couldn't overcome.
But the story doesn't end there with the closing of that file in 1959. Because the questions were never satisfied, the investigation, in a way, never truly stopped.
That's right. The families, researchers, and now modern science. They've refused to let it go. New questions popped up long after the case was stamped closed.
And in our next deep dive, we are going to move beyond that original investigation. We'll look at the legacy of the Dyatlov Pass incident. We will explore how modern technology has tried to answer those impossible questions.
Yeah, there are theories now that use modern snow science and forensics that might finally shed some light on this. It's fascinating, and it's so crucial to understanding the whole picture.
The file may have been closed, but the inquiry continues. Join us next time as we continue to explore the unanswered.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next deep dive.